A rich woman forces a black waiter to play the piano to make fun of him, but her talent leaves everyone speechless. The restaurant La Fontaine was known not only for its sophisticated dishes but for its impeccable atmosphere that seemed to transport its customers to a world of luxury and exclusivity. It was Friday night, and in the room you could hear muffled laughter and the constant sound of cutlery against porcelain plates between the well-decorated tables and the grand piano in the corner. The young Elias, a 22-year-old black waiter, moved with the precision of someone who has learned to ignore critical glances for most of the customers. Elias was invisible, one more part of the service that they guaranteed with their generous tips, but what nobody knew, what Elias carried as his own secret, was that piano shining under the light of the chandeliers represented the world he dreamed of reaching since he was a child. Elias had played the piano not for luxury but as an escape. With a worn and out-of-tune keyboard that his grandmother had given him, he discovered a natural talent that connected him to the music of a visceral way, but like many dreams his was interrupted by reality. Working as a waiter was his way of surviving while he harbored the hope of one day studying music formally. The door of the restaurant opened with a soft sound that carried the weight of something inevitable. Between loud laughter and extravagant perfumes, Clarice Davenport entered, a woman who exuded wealth and superiority with a smile that seemed rehearsed. Clarice was known for her striking appearances at social events and for the pleasure she took in being the center of attention. Dressed in a haute couture outfit, her eyes quickly scanned the room, resting for a moment on Elias, who was organizing the plates on the counter. Clarice and her small group of friends occupied as always the best table in the room, but that night her mood was different. She seemed anxious, restless, as if she were looking for something or someone to make it the center of her evening, and that was exactly what she found in Elias. As the dinner progressed, Elias did everything possible to avoid the glances that Clarice threw in her direction. He had already dealt with clients like her before, arrogant, conceited, and willing to turn any moment into a show that only served to reaffirm their power, but that night there was something more threatening in her attitude, something that made the air around Elias seem heavier. When he finished telling an exaggerated anecdote about a recent trip to Europe, his eyes returned to rest on Elias. This time he called him with a theatrical gesture. He approached, holding a tray with 2 glasses of wine, maintaining the professional smile he was learning to wear like armor. "What is your name?" she asked with a sweet voice that seemed to hide a hint of irony. "Elias, ma'am," he answered, maintaining his composure. "Elias, a strong man, don't you think?" She smiled, but his tone left it clear that it was not a compliment. "Tell me, Elias, what do you do apart from serving tables?" He hesitated. That question, although simple, it seemed loaded with a trick. "And I like music, sir," he finally answered in a low but firm voice. Clarice smiled even more, as if she had found exactly what she was looking for. "Music," as she said, leaning slightly. "Do you play an instrument?" Elias felt that all the eyes of the table they sat on it. "I knew what was coming next, but I couldn't help it." "Yes, ma'am." "The piano?" The room seemed to have become quieter. Clarice raised an eyebrow as if appreciating a rare, interesting object. She said, leaning back to divert the conversation, "It's a very nice piano, ma'am, but I'm only here to work." Clarice, she laughed, a crystalline sound that cut through the silence. "Don't be so modest, Elias. I'm sure that everyone present would love to know the talent that you hide." "I really can't," he began, but Clarice interrupted him with a gesture. "I insist, a young pianist working as a waiter, that's almost poetic. Come on, show some of what you're capable of." The tension in the room was palpable. Clarice's friends laughed discreetly while other customers watched the scene with growing curiosity. Elias wanted to disappear. He didn't want his passion to be reduced to a show to entertain a bored woman. "I can't, ma'am," he said, trying to maintain a respectful tone. "I'm against the clock." Clarice narrowed her eyes, the smile still fixed on her face, but now with a defiant tone. "Elias, a true artist does not shy away from the opportunity to show your talent. Let's go. Consider it a favor I'm doing you." The silence that followed was heavy. Elias knew that if he refused he could jeopardize his job. He looked at the director, who observed the scene with a neutral expression, but it was clear that he was not going to intervene. Finally, Elias took a deep breath and walked towards the piano. He knew it would be humiliating, but he would not let it happen. Yara Suina sat on the piano bench, and the keys shone in the light of the hall. His fingers hesitated a moment before resting on the keyboard. Elias closed his eyes, trying to ignore the stares that were fixed on his back. He began to play the first chords. They were soft, almost timid, but full of emotion. The chosen song was a classic, Clair de Lune by Debussy. The melody filled the room, delicate and powerful at the same time. The mockery of Larice and his friends began to dissipate, replaced by a silent surprise. Elias lost himself in the music. Each note seemed to tell his story, the sacrifices he had made, the nights in which he had dreamed of something bigger, and the strength he had found to continue forward. He did not play to impress Clarice or the others. He played for himself. When the last note resounded, the silence, the room was deafening. For a moment no one moved, then the room erupted in some clients. They stood up and applauded enthusiastically. Elias looked at Clarice. His smile had disappeared. She looked at him with an expression that he mixed disbelief and discomfort. Elias got up from the piano and went back to work without saying a word. The humiliation that Clarice had planned turned into a moment of silent triumph. He tried to regain his composure, laughing and making vague comments, but the atmosphere at his table had changed Elias. However, he felt something new inside him. Pride. Elias returned to the room with a firm step, but his heart was still racing. He did not look at Clarice or anyone at his table. He picked up his notebook from the counter and continued working as if nothing had happened, but in fact everything had changed. Clarice's words, spoken with such arrogance, did not hit him as before. He knew that at that moment he had shown what he really was, not only a waiter but an artist. While Elias filled glasses of water at a nearby table, another of the customers approached him discreetly. He was an older man dressed simply but with an air of wisdom. He put his hand on Elias's shoulder and whispered, "Son, you have something strange. Don't let anyone make you forget it." Elias nodded without saying anything, but the words warmed his heart. He did not need praise or applause, but knowing that her talent had moved someone was a new sensation, almost unknown. However, while the other customers continued to comment on Elias's unexpected talent, Clarice remained seated at her table, apparently indifferent to what had happened. She held her glass of wine with rehearsed elegance, but her eyes, before so full of superiority, were now lost, fixed on some distant point. She seemed upset, maybe even humiliated, but she tried to hide it with her haughty posture. Clarice snapped her fingers and called Elias again. He hesitated a moment but took a deep breath and approached the table. He would not let himself be intimidated. "Yes, ma'am," she said in a firm but polite voice. Clarice raised her chin and spoke haltingly. "I have to admit it, Elias has surprised me." He took a sip of wine before continuing, "But you know what they say, no talent without opportunity leads nowhere." The words were said with an almost friendly tone, but Elias felt the weight of condescension in them. He remained silent, waiting for her to say something else. "Have you thought ever dedicate yourself professionally to music?" continued Clarice, now with a mischievous smile on her lips, "or is it just a hobby?" Before Elias could answer, one of Clarice's friends, a talkative man who had been laughing out loud all night, interrupted her. "Clarice, maybe he just needs a godfather." He laughed as if the idea was absurd. "Maybe you invest in him." Clarice continued laughing, but it sounded more forced than before. Elias observed the interaction with a calm but firm look. Inside he wanted to reply, say that he didn't need anyone's approval or help, but decided to remain silent. He knew that sometimes silence was more powerful than any word. Clarice, realizing that she hadn't managed to destabilize, changed the subject, but the energy at their table was no longer the same. Their friends, before so involved in their stories and acid comments, now seemed restless, almost out of place. It was as if Elias's performance had revealed something that everyone preferred to ignore: the superficiality of that table. Meanwhile, Elias continued working, but something had changed in him. He couldn't help but think about how Clarice had tried reducing his talent to a joke. No matter how much he had demonstrated his ability, he felt that for people like her it would never be enough, but at the same time he felt a new strength growing inside him, as if each arrogant comment from her was a reminder of why he had to keep fighting. At the end of the evening, when the last customers left the restaurant, the manager called Elias to a corner. He was a robust man with a look that rarely revealed emotion. "Eli, as I have to tell you something," he began, scratching his beard. "I don't know what happened today, but you have half the customers talking about you. Some even asked you to come back to play another night." Elias was surprised but only gave a slight smile. He wasn't interested in performing there again, at least not as part of a show imposed by someone like Clarice. "I only did what I was asked, sir," the manager replied humbly. He looked at him for a moment before patting Elias on the shoulder. "Well, you did more than that. Congratulations, boy." But he hesitated, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "Be careful, people like Clarice don't like to be confronted, and today you have taken something away from her that she never admits." Control. Elias thanked him for his words, but inside he knew that what he had done had nothing to do with Clarice. It wasn't for any of the customers, it was about himself. That night he had remembered who he really was. While Elias gathered his things to leave, Clarice was still sitting at the table fiddling with her cell phone. His friends had already dispersed when Elias crossed with her. She raised her eyes and observed him for a moment. There was something different in his face, perhaps curiosity, perhaps resentment. "Good night, ma'am," said Elias. Before she could say anything she did not answer immediately, but after a moment she murmured almost imperceptibly, "Good night, Elias." That night Elias left the restaurant with mixed feelings. The cool breeze of the night seemed to drag with it the tension that he had been holding in during the whole shift. The weight of Clarice's words continued to weigh on him, but at the same time something inside him seemed stronger, more rooted. He had faced something that a few months ago would have left him completely shocked, but now he saw the situation with different eyes. As he walked towards his house, the lights of the city were reflected in the shop windows and in the parked cars, creating a scene that always made him reflect. He thought that music had always been his ally in difficult times. It was the piano that as a child helped him forget his hunger. It was the piano that as a teenager made him dream of a different future far from the narrow and dark streets where he had grown up. And now it was the piano that reminded him that he was more than just a waiter, More than the limited view that others had of him the next day. However, things began to take an unexpected turn. Early in the morning, Elijah received a call from the restaurant manager. "Elijah, I need you to come early today," he said in a voice that seemed to contain a mix of enthusiasm and urgency. "What happened?" Elijah asked, surprised. "A customer left something here for you, something that I think you might want to see for yourself." Elijah was intrigued but agreed to go early. When he got to the restaurant, he went straight to the manager's office. On the table there was a white envelope with his name handwritten in elegant calligraphy. "It was the woman from last night, Clara," said the manager, crossing his arms. "He left this and asked for it to be delivered directly to you." Elijah picked up the envelope, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He opened it carefully and found a letter inside. The words were as unexpected as they were disconcerting. "Elijah, I don't usually admit when I'm wrong, but yesterday you left me speechless. I've never been someone who easily accepts being surprised, but your song was a punch in the soul. I have the impression that you have more talent than you think, and it would be a waste not to do something with it. There is a music academy in New York that I have contacts with. They are opening applications for a young talent program, and I think you should apply. I am willing to pay for your tuition and even your trip if you decide to try. The choice is of course yours, Clarice." El Dia stood still, reading the letter again to make sure he had understood correctly. He could hardly believe his eyes. The woman who had tried to humiliate him in front of everyone was now offering him something that seemed like a real opportunity to follow his dream, but he also knew that accepting something from her had its weight. He wondered if it was a genuine attempt at redemption or just a way to appease his own conscience. "Are you going to accept?" asked the director, watching Elias with curiosity. Elias did not answer. Immediately he knew that the decision required more thought, so he put the letter in his pocket and left the office, feeling the weight of a decision that could change his life. That afternoon while he worked, he felt the glances of the clients who had been there the night before. Some greeted him discreetly, others gave him smiles of approval. He realized that he had somehow earned the respect of many of those present, but he also realized that Clarice was not there. Her absence was an unexpected relief, but also left room for doubt. Would it be sincere? During the following days, Elias began to think about the proposition. He spent hours reliving the moment next to the piano, remembering the feeling of liberation he had felt. He knew that it was a unique opportunity, something that could really take him down a different path, but at the same time he did not want his decision to be influenced by pride or the pain he felt towards Arise. It was then that he decided to look for someone he trusted deeply, his Aunt Alcira, the person who had taught him to never give up even when the world seemed to be against him. Elias went to her house in a simple neighborhood, and as always he found Alcira in the kitchen making coffee and listening to a local radio station that played old songs. "Aunt, I need your opinion on something," she said, handing her the letter. Alcira read it calmly, adjusting her glasses while Elias watched her nervously. When she finished, she left the letter on the table and looked at him with a soft smile. "Elias, I have known you since you were little, and I know that you have always had a heart bigger than your pride. This woman may have tried to belittle, but in the end she saw what we all already knew. You have something special. If she is offering you an opportunity, take advantage of it for your own good, not to prove anything to her or anyone, but because you deserve to follow your dreams." Sira's words echoed in Elias's mind for days. Deep down he knew his aunt was right. It was not an opportunity he could ignore regardless of who offered it to him. So with his heart full of determination, Elias picked up the phone and dialed the number Clarice had left at the end of the letter. When she answered, her voice was firm but different from the arrogance he remembered. "I have decided to accept your offer," she said bluntly, "but only because I believe in my talent, not because I need to prove anything to anyone." Clarice was silent for a few seconds before replying, "And precisely for that reason you deserve this opportunity." Elias knew that his decision to accept Clarice's offer would only be the beginning of a long road. He spent the following week filling out the application for the New York Young Talent Program and rehearsing like never before. In the restaurant the atmosphere had changed. Clients who had witnessed his performance continued to comment on the memorable revelation, and some even asked him to play again, but Elias, now with a renewed focus, politely refused. Standing firm in his decision to concentrate on his future, the day of the audition, Elias got up early with a pounding heart. He traveled to New York with the tickets paid by Clarice and entered the building of the renowned music academy. The walls were full of portraits of famous musicians, and the atmosphere gave off the grandeur he had always dreamed of, but at the same time he felt the weight of expectations and doubts. He wondered if he really belonged in that place, surrounded by young people who seemed to have had all the opportunities he never had. When his turn came, Elias was led to a room with a shining grand piano in the center. Sitting in front of him were three judges, all with serious expressions and open notebooks. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the memories take him to that old piano in his Aunt Alcira's house where it all began. The notes flowed from his fingers with the same passion and authenticity that he had shown that night in the restaurant. Each chord seemed to tell a story, each melody carried the strength of its journey. When it ended, the room fell silent. The judges Exchanged glances, clearly impressed but maintained their professional composure. "Thank you very much, Mr. Costa," said one of them. Elias thanked them with a nod and left the room feeling lighter, as if regardless of the result he had already achieved something important. He had shown who he was. A few weeks later Elias received his acceptance letter. He had gotten a place in the program. His joy was immediate, but it was also accompanied by an even greater determination. He knew that it was his chance to transform his life and prove to himself and to all those who doubted him that he could do it. The day he left for New York, Elias passed by the restaurant for the last time. He said goodbye to his co-workers, who gave him a great ovation, and he thanked the manager for having believed in him from the beginning. But the most unexpected moment came when Clarice appeared. She was more humble. Without her usual pose of superiority, she handed him a small envelope with a short note and a check. "Elias, your talent is greater than anyone could imagine. Use this to go further. It is not charity, it is an investment in the future. I think you will have good luck." Clarice. Elias thanked her but made it clear that her journey would be guided by the same. "What happens from now on will depend on me," he said with a confident smile. Clarice nodded, seeming to understand. During the following months Elias immersed himself fully in his studies. Each lesson, each rehearsal was an opportunity to grow and polish the talent that he always knew he had. The story of his performance in the restaurant continued to spread, inspiring others to never give up on their dreams whatever the circumstances. And for those who followed him closely or from afar, the message was clear. Life can be full of challenges and humiliations, but the strength of character and genuine talent will always speak louder. Elias knew that his journey had only just begun, but he also knew that with hard work and passion he could achieve anything. If you also believe in the power of resilience and the value of never giving up on your dream, share this story and inspire someone today. Subscribe to the channel to learn more stories like this, and remember, you are stronger than you think.